Hey, what's good, everybody? I'd like to welcome you all to a brand new episode of the Boombox Guru. I'm your host, LB. So, for today's show, I wanted to talk about 6 albums that I feel helped shape modern metal music. I feel that these 6 albums, had they not been released, had it not been for the impact and influence that they had on so many musicians, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, that there's a lot of things that have become the standard in metal music now, depending on your taste, for better or for worse, that we wouldn't have if it weren't for these particular albums. Now, these aren't just the only albums that I think had an impact on modern metal, but these are 6 ones that I wanted to discuss today. So, without further ado, let's get into this video. We're going to start with the first album, which is Faith No More's The Real Thing, released in 1989. And this was the first album that really cemented the classic lineup. You know, this is the first album with Mike Patton uh, as lead vocalist after Chuck Mosley, the late Chuck Mosley now, who was dismissed from the band. And I gotta say, The Real Thing was a huge success. You know, they had a big hit with the song called Epic, and it really took Faith No More to the next level. But not only that, man, The Real Thing was one of the early albums that really helped to pioneer like several subgenres that would be hugely popular in the 90s. I mean, it helped to pioneer rap metal, funk metal, alternative metal, and avant-garde metal, because all these elements are implemented into this sound that gives it a uniqueness, and it just really helped to set Faith No More apart from so many other bands that were real popular at the time. And this was a album that was a huge impact on the burgeoning alternative metal movement, or just alternative music movement that was happening around the late 80s, early 90s, along with Jane's Addiction. But so many bands have cited The Real Thing as being a wake-up call that really was a turning point in their lives as artists. I know Corey Taylor, he said that when the Epic came out, that's what really motivated him to like kind of come out of whatever depression he was dealing with at the time. It really motivated him to really get on his grind and to stick with his dream and his goals. Uh, Linkin Park, so many bands within the like 90s new metal scene have cited The Real Thing as a huge influence on them taking rap music and hip hop and blending it in with metal and other genres. And it also set the stage for Mike Patton's other band, Mr. Bungle, which Mr. Bungle was already a band before he joined Faith No More. But the success of this record helped to set the stage for them to actually come out with their debut album 2 years later in 1991, which that record in itself just set the stage for avant-garde metal, for bands to just be way more experimental and risk-taking in metal music. But so many influences and impactful moments that this record helped to bring to metal music. And it's still a timeless classic today that people continue to talk about. It still ended up on the best list, the best metal records of all time. It's one of my favorite records of all time that I listen to on a regular basis, man. So yeah, number one for me is The Real Thing by Faith No More. Moving along, this next album is the Black Album by Metallica, released in 1991. And I talked about this record. Well, I didn't talk about it. I made a post about it on Instagram for its 30th anniversary, and I talked about how this album was a game changer, because when this record came out, the huge success of this album made so many metal bands change their sound. Like, a lot of thrash metal bands started to change and go with a more mainstream sound, or maybe their record labels were pressuring them to go in that direction. And it really showed how Metallica was such a leader within the thrash metal movement, that when this record came out, other bands were willing to change their style and abandon thrash metal to go for a more accessible heavy metal style. So I think that this album helped to bring a more mainstream heavy metal appeal that wasn't necessarily like glam metal was in the 80s. Like, you could still be heavy, but you could also have a more mellower, softer side that could be more appealing to the masses. And I've even thought about it that the Black Album probably set the stage for like the post grunge era in the late 90s and 2000s, where bands were implementing a lot of those heavy metal elements into their sound, but they were also switching it up and bringing in their softer side. So I think that this album set the stage for bands like Creed to be hugely successful, Breaking Benjamin to be hugely successful, even more metal bands like Disturbed. These are bands who can be really heavy, but at the same time, they can switch it up and show a softer side, show a different dynamic, which is what the Black Album did. Because the Black Album has so many heavy moments on there, but it does show a lot of softer moments as well, like the Unforgiven, and of course one of the big hits, the ballad, no, Nothing Else Matters, and so forth, man. But I think that the Black Album really helped open the doors for those type of bands to kind of play around with those dynamics as well, not just be totally heavy, but also show a more mellower side. And the production values on this album, uh, people still look at the Black Album in high regard as far as its production. I know a lot of rock bands, a lot of metal bands, they still hold the standard of the best production to the Black Album. So that's another reason why I thought that this album really helped to impact a lot of those bands. Basically, I think that it was a gateway for a lot of the mainstream radio rock of the late 90s and early 2000s. This was the beginning. All right, so next album is Pantera's Vulgar Display of Power, released in 1992. My favorite Pantera album, the first Pantera album I ever heard that really got me into the band. So, Pantera, I mean, honestly, in general, Pantera was a big influence on a lot of modern metal bands, but I think that Vulgar Display of Power in particular was a record that really opened the doors and allowed more extreme bands to have mainstream success. Because even though the Black Album was a heavy metal record, it wasn't an extreme album. If you get me, this album was extreme. It really helped to define the groove metal genre. It even kind of helped bring in thrash metal into the 90s a bit more. Even though people were saying thrash died in 1991, I would say that groove metal was kind of like thrash metal bands masking that sound. But so many bands I think would not be where they are now if it had not been for this record. I don't think Slipknot would have been able to have the extreme success that they've had. Lamb of God, a lot of the metalcore bands that emerged in the late 90s and early 2000s, like Killswitch Engage and so forth. Just it's so many countless bands that, in spite of all the more mainstream stuff that was being played, there was a few like more heavier and more extreme bands that were able to sign to major labels and were able to reap the benefits of being like a radio rock band. And I think that Pantera really opened the doors for that. They were able to speak to a generation of listeners with this record. It's crazy because Vulgar Display of Power, this record came out during the height of the grunge era, but somehow they were able to speak to that culture of kids as well as continue to carry the flag of heavy metal. Because there was a lot of people that were into bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots. There was a lot of people that were fans of those bands, but they also were huge fans of Pantera as well. So they were able to like bring in different generations of music fans as well. But yeah, they carried the flag of heavy metal, of extreme heavy metal, and they helped to define groove metal, which is one of my favorite subgenres in metal. And you can hear a lot of Dimebag Darrell's riffs, his style being played in a lot of modern metal bands. A lot of metalcore bands have looked to Dimebag Darrell as a huge influence in their guitar playing style. And it just really set the stage for so many more heavier string bands to be able to be at the forefront, man. So there's no doubt that this album was a huge impact on modern metal. No doubt. It really set the stage. And not to mention Phil Anselmo as a vocalist, man. He brought in that harsh, more punk rock, hardcore influenced vocal style that I think really was an influence on so many other bands that formed later on, and even his image, because at this point, Phil, he like cut his hair and everything, so you no longer had to have a long hair to be in a metal band and stuff like that. So many things that this album did that really helped shape modern metal, man. So definitely a groundbreaking record right here, man. All right, so moving along, this next album is Helmet, Meantime, also released in 1992. So let me tell you, like every new metal band owes Page Hamilton a lot of money. He should be a freaking multi-millionaire because his riffs that he wrote and created, the sound that he shaped with Helmet, so many new metal bands in the 90s really, they like took it and ran with it, and they just made so much money and got so much success off of it. And the crazy thing is, Helmet really isn't necessarily a metal band. I know Page Hamilton, he never really liked Helmet being associated with metal, especially new metal and stuff like that. But his style, the writing, the musicianship, everything, like the syncopated riffs, that stop and go type of deal that they would do with the guitars and everything, that really influenced a lot of bands, even their image, because if you looked at Helmet, they didn't really look like a rock band. They looked like normal guys that you would bump into on the streets. But everything about this album, you still hear in modern metal. I've heard a lot of the riffs that Page Hamilton created. I've heard them on System of a Down. I've definitely heard them on Korn, and I still continue to hear a lot of that in some of these newer bands that are coming out. Whether they know where it originated from or not, I don't know. But this is the forefather of it, the godfather of it. Honestly, I mean, so many people were influenced by this record. I mean, it was a huge success. As far as I know, it was the most successful album that Helmet ever came out with. But I mean, the song Unsung, the title track In the Meantime, so this record just influenced so many bands, and it even influenced people within groove metal. I know I read somewhere where Pantera, they were influenced by like the style that Helmet were displaying on this record, and they sort of kind of implemented that into their playing. I know Dimebag Darrell, I read somewhere where he was influenced by Page Hamilton's riffs and so forth, man. But yeah, every freaking new metal band that came out in the 90s and early 2000s, man, they they owe Page Hamilton a lot of freaking money, man, because his riffs, that whole formula that they created with the like kind of stop and go type factor within the music, so many metal bands did that and ran with it and were hugely successful off of it. So definitely Helmet's In the Meantime, a great record too, from start to finish, a great record. All right, so this next album, also released in 1992. This is the self-titled debut album from Rage Against the Machine. So, Rage Against the Machine, I'm not gonna say they were the first like rap metal band. I would give that to Stuck Mojo. Stuck Mojo actually formed and started doing things a couple of years before Rage Against the Machine, and I think Stuck Mojo is far better. But Rage Against the Machine's self-titled debut album is the record that really kicked down the doors, kind of like what Nirvana did for grunge. Even though Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and a few other bands started before them, it was Nirvana's Nevermind that really blew down the doors, that put Seattle grunge on the map. So for rap metal, that's Rage Against the Machine's self-titled debut record. This album, again, it kicked down the doors, and it brought rap metal to a mainstream appeal, and it legitimized the genre. So there was a lot of bands that were influenced by this. I mean, pretty much every new metal band was influenced by Rage Against the Machine, because this was something that was groundbreaking. Nobody had seen nothing at this level at this time. Nobody had seen nothing to this level before at this time, after Public Enemy did the Bring the Noise remix with Anthrax. That was huge. That was a huge thing right there. But that was more of like a I guess like a more of a one-off thing. I don't want to call it a novelty because that it was a serious song, but that was more of like a one-off thing that they wanted to do with Public Enemy because it was Scott Ian's favorite rap group. But after, but until Rage Against the Machine, nobody had seen nothing like that to that level, and Rage really took it to that level, and they made it possible for it to be appealing to the masses. And again, kind of like Pantera with Vulgar Display of Power, they were able to speak to different generations, or should I say different music fans. They brought in the grunge kids as well as the hardcore kids and the metal kids. And like I said, they legitimized rap metal because so many other people saw what Rage was doing, and it was like, yo, that is something totally different. Hey, we should try that. We should do that. And for better or for worse, it worked out. I mean, they're along with Rage, Stuck Mojo, Biohazard, Bionic Jive, and a few other ones. My biggest gripe about rap metal is that a lot of the bands weren't that great, especially when it comes to the vocalists. Zach De La Rocha is hands down the best rap metal vocalist because he really can rap. He's really a lyricist. He's really an MC. I mean, he's collaborated with legit hip hop artists. And I think that most rap metal bands kind of dropped the ball on finding like legit lyricists and people who could actually rap to be vocalists. And some of them really kind of diluted the genre by being corny, not being as heavy and so forth. But for the most part, man, there were a lot of good bands that took what Rage Against the Machine did and they expounded upon it and made it better. They put their own little twist on it. Some bands went even heavier, and they did it they did it justice. They did it good justice, basically. And for me, even though there are other rap metal bands that I think that are far better than Rage Against the Machine, or that were a lot heavier and probably better than this debut album, it was this record that really set the stage and really brought it to prominence, man. So there's no way I can take away from this album, and it's actually my favorite rap metal, one of my favorite rap metal albums, but it is my favorite Rage Against the Machine record, man. But definitely a groundbreaking record too that went along to help shape modern metal too. And last but not least, we have the self-titled debut album from Korn, released in 1994. And like Rage Against the Machine's self-titled debut album, this is the album that pretty much legitimized nu metal. This is the album that made nu metal a genre. This is the first nu metal album. Although I will argue that the first Korn album, I will argue too that it's more of a groove metal album because there's a lot of groove involved in this, a lot of sort of kind of like maybe Pantera, Machine Head kind of groove styles being employed on this record. And of course, the funk element is there. Fieldy is one of the funkiest bassists out there, man. But yeah, this album is what really helped define nu metal. And just like Rage Against the Machine's debut album, a lot of bands were influenced by what Korn were doing. Cause, I was only 4 or 5 years old when this record came out, so I don't quite remember this album. I didn't really know who Korn was until they did Follow the Leader, which was 4 years later. But I digress. This album, I can only imagine being like of the right age in 1994 and first hearing this record. I mean, you've heard Pantera, you've heard Rage Against the Machine, you've heard Metallica's Black Album and other stuff. And then you hear this record and you're like, whoa, what the heck is going on? Like the guitars are so freaking down tuned. It's so freaking heavy and kind of a murky sound, and it's groovy. I can only imagine what that was like first hearing that. So I can see why so many bands kind of went after that sound and was like, yo, this is something totally different, man. We need to pick up on this. But it blew up. It was hugely successful, and it created a freaking how many years? About seven years maybe of a genre that was at its peak and hugely successful. But a great record all around, man. They set the stage for so many other bands, and there's a lot of things that are employed on this record that I still continue to hear today in modern metal, man. And cause new metal, depending on who you are, for better or for worse, I'll say that again. New metal was starting to make a comeback here, but uh, the album was just groundbreaking, man. It just really, I mean, anybody that grew up in that new metal era know what I'm talking about. How so many bands even went and changed their style to that. Sepultura did it with the Roots album, and Machine Head, they did it with the Burning Red album in '98, '99. So it kind of did the same thing that Metallica did with the Black album, where bands picked up on that sound. They picked up on something different, and they seen how successful it was, and was like, hey, let's go with it. But yeah, that right there, that is my 6 albums that I feel helped to shape modern metal music, man. And if you're watching this video, leave a comment and tell me whether you agree, whether you disagree. You can leave your list of albums that you think had more of an impact on modern metal. I'll be glad to hear from anybody else's opinion. Also, be sure to hit the thumbs up and like the video. It helps give my video more exposure. Also, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the bell so you'll be notified when I drop new content. I also have links to my social media in the description. I'm most active on Instagram, so if you want to follow my Instagram, that'd be cool. And stay tuned for more videos. I got a few videos, in the can that I'm gonna be scheduling for premiere on my channel, so be on the lookout for that. Make sure you share the videos to people who you feel maybe enjoy my content. I really would appreciate that. And I hope everyone has a blessed day, a blessed rest of the week. And as always, love, peace, and music. Peace out.